Beautiful prayer litany, Brent. Thank you for sharing that. This week, I know a number of us have been hearing a lot about this 1 year of COVID that we as Americans have felt. It's been longer in China and other places. And while there's a lot of good news about vaccines and we celebrate that, and we're looking towards a new normal, or maybe being able to get together in some ways, there's also been the statistics of how much life has been lost. And that's a lot of loss for us, over 500,000 in our own country. So today I invite us to really consider our grief. And so I'm reading the story of Jesus and his loss and grief from John 11, verses 17 to 37. So this whole chapter is about the death of Lazarus, or most of the chapter. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to console Martha and Mary about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Here ends the reading. This is the word of God for us today. Thanks be to God. Just a minute as I pull up my notes. "43 years ago this month, I was backpacking across Europe with two friends. We graduated a semester early from college. And this was before email and cell phones and no long distance charges. In fact, we used those aerograms to communicate, and we'd go to the American Express office. We had our itinerary. But just to keep our parents from worrying too much, once a week, one of us would go somewhere. I can't remember if it was the post office, the American Express office, and we would call collect, which was pretty expensive, our parents and check in with them. And then that parent would call the other parents and let them know that we were okay. I believe we were in Switzerland in March, at least that week. And it was Adele, my friend Adele, who had gone and spoken with her mother on the phone. And when she came back to the room, she said, we said, well, how were things? And she said, fine. She said, yeah. And then she said, Anne, you knew your grandmother died, didn't you? And I didn't. I was shocked. She was 79, not in the best health, but she lived at home. She had high blood pressure. She was very deaf. But it was hard. I was across the ocean. I couldn't attend her service. She had had a stroke and had been in the hospital, I think, 2 days. In fact, she died. She either had the stroke or she died on Palm Sunday. So it was all around Holy Week too. It was hard. It was what we call complicated grief. Complicated grief. Not easy grief. I was away. I couldn't grieve the normal way with family. I couldn't attend the service. And I had not the easiest relationship with my grandmother. I knew she loved me and I loved her, but she was particular and a little judgmental. I didn't feel that unconditional love like I did with my other grandmother. And so it was painful. It was painful to hear it that way too. Adele didn't know. We have had complicated grief this year because we haven't been able to grieve in the normal ways. The statistics have been off the charts. They said this week that 1 in 3 of us has known someone to die of COVID. We have lost a close loved one or a dear one to COVID. Over 500,000 in our country. And no services or services on Zoom maybe, or tiny family services at gravesides. It's been complicated. It was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross who identified the 5 stages of grief, and other psychologists have kind of agreed, but they are denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and acceptance. And I think we can see these in ourselves, and we can see them in this story. And they don't necessarily go in order. We can bounce around with them. But just to go back to our scripture story, earlier in the chapter, word has come to Jesus that Lazarus is dying. Let me find that again. Lord, the sisters sent a message to Jesus Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Now we think, oh, Jesus knew what was going to happen, you know, that Lazarus was going to die and that he would raise him. But Jesus was human. Maybe Jesus was in denial that Lazarus really wasn't that ill, or that he wouldn't, you know, that there was plenty of time for him to get back. We've probably had that happen to us. Our loved one isn't going to die. I had that feeling when I heard my friend Roger had COVID, and even that he was put on a respirator, I just felt like he was going to live. I was, that this wasn't going to take his life. So there's that denial. And then there's anger sometimes. I think both Martha and Mary were angry with Jesus. They had sent word to him that their brother, whom he loved, was ill, seriously ill, and he didn't come. He kept doing what he was doing. He didn't come immediately. So both sisters, when they saw Jesus, said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. They were angry. I know people who, with our grief, we can be angry at the one who died. Why did you smoke? Why didn't you take care of yourself? Why didn't you go to the doctor? Why did this? Why did you go to the grocery store and subject yourself to COVID? I mean, we can get angry at the loved one. We can get angry at ourselves. Why didn't I call her and tell her I loved her? Why didn't I write him? Why didn't I visit? Why didn't I insist that they go to the doctor? We can be angry at God. And certainly, at times, we've been angry at God this year. It doesn't have to make sense, but angry that there is all this pandemic, that there is injustice in this world, in the pandemic, that there's injustice in terms of healthcare, racial injustice. So we've been angry at times, and it's all over the place. It's messy, it's complicated. And there's bargaining. I kind of wonder whether Martha was bargaining. Did you hear that? Selena says yes. Yeah. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even whatever you ask now, God will do for you. Your brother will rise. Well, I know you'll rise in the last day. She couldn't even believe that her bargaining was sort of working. Jesus had a plan there. So we bargain with God. I've heard people bargain before and after deaths. You know, just let my great-grandchild live. Take me, God. There's a woman here in Point who's put me 100 next month, or the end of this month. And she's had a great-grandchild who's been in the hospital for 3 months upon his birth. You know, he's just got something with his heart that's not quite right. And they get hopeful and they're not hopeful. And she said, you know, I just keep telling God, take me and let little Zeb live. Take me, we bargain. We ask God for the obvious, for what makes sense. And then there's the sadness. I think that's my favorite part, and maybe many people's favorite part of this story. And then Jesus wept. Jesus wept. Jesus cried. Jesus shed tears. Earlier, the verse before that says, Jesus was greatly distressed by their grief. And then Jesus acknowledged his own grief, his own sadness, his own loss. It's been hard to do that this year. We've been detached and separated from one another, from those we've lost. And it's an important thing to do. At Heron Point, I've started hanging ribbons about every 2 or 3 months. We have this ritual of remembrance. And I hang these ribbons with the person's name and the year of death. And we put them on this dowel, and it kind of makes a banner. And then on All Saints, we take those ribbons off and give them to the family members. And that's become much more important because even a number of these people aren't having services at all. They're not even having obituaries. It is so important to remember and to give thanks. So important. I really want to invite, until we do go through these phases, and particularly until we acknowledge the loss, it's really hard to come to acceptance and to thanksgiving for that life and to gratitude for what that life has meant to you, to me. And so I invite us this morning to remember and to grieve together some of the lives that we've lost this year. It hit me, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, I get the New York Times, the summary on email, the morning edition, which is like a summary of the news. I don't know if it was that or the regular one, but it had the obituaries, and I glanced through those. And this particular one, usually there's like half of them that'll say died from complications to COVID. In this section, they had them grouped. They were all from COVID. And we're used to it being someone in their 70s, 80s, 90s. But there was a 38 or 9-year-old opera singer. These are all kind of famous people or well-known people that died of COVID. And then there was a 40-year-old woman who died of 40-something. I can't remember if she was an artist or I think she was a dancer. But they spanned an age from 30s to 90s. And in the New York Times, these are easy to see what we've lost in terms of this opera singer and this dancer, their art that the world is lost, bereft of. There are leaders, there are teachers, there are doctors, there are mothers and spouses and children and loved ones. All these things that we've lost. And so I mention again, Eleanor Charles, who died of COVID at the country house. She was ready. She was in her 90s. But what a vibrant, loving spirit. And I'm sorry that I didn't get to see her again and hug her and pray with her or hold her hand. Her daughter said, even in death, Mother taught us and loved us. She showed us how to die. And then my friend Roger, with whom I worked at the church, who had a beautiful voice. I mentioned him before. It's the first time I heard the hymn, His Eyes on the Sparrow. He sang it in worship. Roger was a father. He was gay. He worked as a caseworker for Delaware AIDS for many years. He was very giving. He was a very proud grandfather. And he was a deacon at Westminster these last couple of years since he retired. And he was basically my age. I think he was maybe 1 year older. So I grieve the loss of these two people in my life and in the lives of their loved ones in this world. So I invite anyone who'd like to share now to do so.